Hello, my name is Edwin Rutsch, and I'm the director of the Empathy Center located here in beautiful Santa Barbara, California. The center's mission is to build the empathy movement and to raise the level of empathy in society through education and community building initiatives.
And my name is Anita Nowak. I teach at McGill University, and I'm the author of Purposeful Empathy, a book that invites readers to turn up the volume of empathy in their lives.
And at the beginning of 2024, Anita and I co-hosted the Empathy Summit, brought to you by the Empathy Center, and more than 40 authors of books about empathy participated.
They shared what their book was about, why they were motivated to write it, and what they hope readers will take away. Thank you so much for watching, and we hope you'll buy their book.
And we have our next speaker coming up, Elizabeth Segal. And Elizabeth is a emeritus professor at the School of Social Work at Arizona State University and is a social policy analyst with a background in professional work, and her research is centering on social empathy. And she's also the author of several books on empathy, including Social Empathy, The Art of Understanding Others and Assessing Empathy. And you're muted if you want to unmute, and the floor is yours, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Edwin. It's great to be here. Good morning to everyone. Some of you might be moving into afternoon. The book that I'm talking about today, Social Empathy, was written to apply empathic abilities or empathic insights in order to encourage the building of public policies that were more responsive to the lived experiences of people, particularly the people and groups for whom those policies were designed. I'm going to talk a little bit about why I wrote the book based on my policy work, but I just wanted to add first that when I started exploring this based on my research and teaching on public policy, even though I'm a trained social worker, I realized I was deficient in understanding interpersonal empathy as opposed to social empathy. Then interpersonal empathy is that empathic insight in relating one-on-one or in a small group. And it took me on a complete side route when I started looking at empathy for quite a few years to learn in depth about the cognitive neuroscience research that had just emerged in the early 2000s and taught me a lot about from a clinical and a physical science perspective of empathy. So that's where I did not start with the idea of social empathy, but I realized I had to do that. So as Edwin mentioned, there's other books, and my book, Assessing Empathy, is much more academically oriented and includes instruments that, with a team, I developed to measure empathy. So that was sort of the background, but what drove me there, and in essence to write both this book, Social Empathy and Assessing Empathy, was that teaching public policy for years and working with social workers in what we call macro practice, I noticed something in my teaching in my classes. I noticed that some students, when we talk about particularly the area of poverty, which was where I had done a lot of my early research, some people got it in the class, like they understood, even if they didn't grow up poor, they could understand poverty, and others didn't. And those who didn't, it wasn't because they weren't necessarily empathic on an interpersonal level. They definitely, I mean, I realize these are great students, and I've been blessed with hundreds of great students in my career. And I was trying to figure out why some students got it and others didn't, meaning that some students understood what it might be like to grow up impoverished, grow up struggling, even if they themselves had not, but others didn't. And that's what led me on this study of empathy and trying to figure out, is in essence, why some people could walk in other people's shoes that they didn't know or who were different from them. And that was the telling factor, was that what was really critical was that the challenge to walk in the shoes of others who do not look like you, who are not like you. So I started applying this in policy and discovered, and this is not going to surprise probably anyone program, that people who make policy decisions, those in power, often don't walk in the same ways and life experiences of those for whom they are making policy. This was particularly evident in some research I did years ago, when there was this big move called welfare reform, which was essentially how to rearrange, is a nice way to put it, but how to change public policy for particularly poor women and children who were the major recipients of welfare. And I did a little analysis of all those who were voting and developing the policy versus those for whom they were. And it was obvious that we were talking about a group of lawmakers who were older, primarily male, who were far more educated, and were white, making policies for people who were very different from them, who were primarily young women, had children, and had not benefited from higher education to the extent that they had. And so they were talking about completely different worlds, and you could see it in their expression of how they analyzed policy and what the policy became. And so that, coupled with my teaching, is what really drove me to write the book Social Empathy. I didn't even start with the concept of social empathy initially, because I didn't know what I was actually looking for and looking at. And it was my study of interpersonal empathy that led me to realize how critical it is for those, particularly people who are not experiencing that which those for whom they are making decisions, how important it is for them to understand. And so social empathy is it's definitely built on interpersonal empathy, but it consists of two extensive skills that build off of interpersonal empathy. And one of those is the ability to do, everyone's talked a lot about perspective taking, to do what I call macro perspective taking. And that is to really look at groups that you don't belong to, who are different from you, populations, regions, really look at others who are different from you, but try to step into their world and see the world as they do and experience their experiences as if you were them. And that's macro perspective. And the other piece that is unique to social empathy is a deep dive into contextual understanding. While empathy and interpersonal empathy, we often take into the context of the immediate person, what social empathy asks us to do is look at contextual understanding, understanding the historical impact, the impact of history, the historical context of how groups were evolved in this country or other countries, internationally, locally, but to understand what forces, whether they be social, economic, political, etc., imposed on the development of these groups in ways that make them the way they are and make others look and act the way they do. And that is stepping into those worlds. So that's what social empathy asks us to do. My hope in writing the book was, and of course readers would take away from it, is that when we experience others from their perspective, and I just want to add, sometimes people think they're walking in other people's shoes, but they're filtering it through their own values, their own understanding, and their own experiences. Of course, those enter into empathic insight, but it's important to take the perspective of others from their perspective. And that's why contextual understanding and macro perspective taking are so important. And so that for those who are in policy making, which is where I do a lot of my work and have done that over the years, is can they imagine the lives and the lived experiences of those for whom they are making policy? Because their policies impact so many people, and public policy directly affects all of us. And if we are developing policies that don't understand the true lived experiences of others, we will have bad policy. And we will often have unintended consequences that are detrimental to the well-being and the ability of people to prosper. So
1 minute.
Thank you. So what I hope people will take away is, and the book has skills, but also talks about how we can implement social empathy, is that people will walk away with some understanding of new skills of taking interpersonal empathy and moving it to a macro level and hopefully making social change. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much, Elizabeth, and really lovely to see you again. I'd done an interview with you years ago, so great to see you again.